Over the last 10 years, we've seen 15 out of the 24 Championship clubs gaining fans, while the other 9 we've seen losing them. In today's video, we're going to be having a closer look into this phenomenon, where I've taken each Championship club's attendance figures from last season and stacked them against their attendance figures from the 2014/15 season, so 10 years ago. I've then ranked every single Championship clubs by either how many fans they've lost or gained in that time, and we'll dive into some of the reasons why throughout today's video. So coming in at the bottom of the pile, and the club that's lost the most fans since 2014/15, it's Swansea, who have lost just over 5,000 fans when comparing the averages attendances from 10 years ago to today's figures. Now, a bit of context needs to be taken into consideration. Swansea were playing in the Premier League in 2014, and they were actually enjoying a really good campaign that year. They finished 8th in the Premier League, so with that sort of context, it's no real surprise that their attendance figures have dwindled since they've been back down in the Championship. And it's a very similar story for Stoke City as well. No real surprises that their attendances have gone down over the last 10 years, considering they're no longer playing in the Premier League. In 2014/15, they finished 9th in the Premier League that year. You compare that to the sort of football that Stoke fans have been endured to in recent times, yeah, it's no surprise that their attendance figures have dropped off. They've lost just over 4,200 fans comparing those two average attendances. Still getting good numbers for Championship football, but not quite hitting those same attendance figures that they were in the top flight. Hull City are another club who have lost fans when comparing their attendances from 10 years ago until today. Now, in 2014/15, they were playing in the Premier League, attracting crowds of just over 23,500 on average. Hull are a club who have seen some of the biggest fluctuations in the Championship over their attendances in recent years, I think it's fair to say. At Hull's lowest points, attendances dropped to around about 11,500, and they've substantially gone up since that point, but not quite to the level that they were at 10 years ago in the Premier League. On average, Loftus Road is around 1,900 fans lighter than it was 10 years ago. It is worth pointing out that, like all the clubs that have gone before them here, QPR were also playing in the Premier League in 2014/15, so noticing a common trend at this point of the table, and I think it's fairly self-explanatory. Premier League football is always likely to attract more fans to the ground. But with that being said, there's not been a huge fluctuation overall, still attracting crowds of over 15,800 in the Championship isn't that far of a cry from where they were in the Premier League in terms of crowds. Next up on this list, we've got the Charlton Athletic fans, who have lost 1,453 fans when comparing their attendances to 10 years ago. Now, in 2014/15, Charlton were a mid-table Championship club, and I'd absolutely guarantee that their attendance figures going into the Championship next season will definitely be higher than what they were in League One last time around. So that'll probably be a bit more of a fair comparison, really, with Charlton at the same level. So if they can match those attendance figures next season of just over 16,700, then they've not really gained or lost any fans in that time, I suppose. After that, we've got the Derby County fans. Now, this is the part of the video where we get into the really marginal gains or losses, where there's really not been a lot of fluctuations in these next few clubs. You can see here by this table, Derby have lost just 214 fans on average since the 2014/15 season. So really not much of a fluctuation whatsoever. Derby, regardless of whether they've been battling for the playoffs at the top end of the Championship or fighting relegation at the bottom of it, their fans have always tended to turn up in their numbers week in, week out, and you can see there's barely a fluctuation in that 10-year span. Next up on this list, we've got the Leicester City fans in at the King Power, and like we were just saying about Derby, there's barely been a fluctuation over the Leicester attendances in these last 10 years. Taking their numbers from last season in the Premier League, comparing it to 2014/15, just a fluctuation of 205 fans, which is barely anything. 17th on this list, we've got the Norwich City fans, a fluctuation even smaller than that. Just 27 fans on average has been the difference between Norwich's attendances in the 2024/25 campaign and in 2014/15. Norwich have to be some of the most consistent fans in England in terms of selling out their season ticket allocations every single year. Regardless of what division they're in, they're always getting around about that mark of just over 26k, and I think that has to be respected. By far the smallest fluctuation on this entire list, though, belongs to West Brom, who have lost 7 fans on average since the 2014/15 2014/15 campaign when comparing those two attendance figures. Absolutely incredible. Like we were saying with Norwich before, West Brom definitely belong in that category of some of the most loyal fans in England, that regardless of what division they're playing in really, attendances have rarely fluctuated that much. Yeah, one of the most consistent fan bases in the Championship. There's not a lot between those attendance figures, are there? But this is the part of the video where we get into some of the clubs who have gained fans over the last 10 years, and the first club that's applicable to is Southampton, albeit there's not really been much of a fluctuation in their attendances over these last 10 years. Just a 213 difference for the Saints fans in at St Mary's when comparing last season into the Premier League to 2014/15. Coming in 14th on this list, we've got the Blackburn Rovers fans. They've gained 1,248 fans on average when comparing their attendances to 2014/15. Now, Blackburn fans always tend to get a bit of stick online because of the size of Ewood Park and the average gates going in there. You know, it's regularly only about half full. But in fairness to them, their fan base has been steadily growing back again in recent years. Obviously, they're still not quite near the numbers that they were getting when they were an established Premier League club, but since being back down in the Championship, they have been gradually building that fan base up again. Comparing their attendances from 10 years ago, Watford have gained just over 2,700 fans. Now, Watford's attendances peaked while they were playing in the Premier League. For context, in 2014/15, they were playing in the Championship, but finished second that year. Last season in the Championship, in what was a bit of an average campaign for them really, they were still attracting more fans to Vicarage Road, over 19,300 on average. Slap bang in the middle of this table, we've got the Millwall fans, who have gained 4,588 supporters since the 2014/15 campaign. Now, in 2014/15, Millwall were an absolute mess. They were relegated from the Championship that season. Started that campaign out with Ian Holloway, who, don't think is the most popular Millwall manager in recent history. After challenging for the playoffs under Alex Neil last season, no surprise that their attendances have bumped up in recent times. Despite Sheffield Wednesday fans forking out for some ridiculously priced tickets, their fan base has grown in the last 10 years. They've gained just over 4,600 fans when comparing their attendances from last season to the 2014/15 campaign. In recent times, Sheffield Wednesday's average attendances peaked in 2016/17 when they were getting over 27k on average, but since that point they've remained fairly consistent really. 10th on this list, we've got the Portsmouth fans, who have gained just over 5,000 fans when comparing their average attendances from the 2014/15 campaign to these days. Now, back in 2014, Portsmouth were a mid-table League Two club, which shows just how far they've come in these last 10 years. Portsmouth fans, definitely over the last 20 or so years, have definitely experienced more turbulence and up and downs than their average fan base, I think it would be fair to say. In terms of noise, definitely some of the best Championship fans in the league these days though. Oxford United's average attendances have almost doubled in the last 10 years. In 2014/15, they were getting average gates of just over 6,100 in League Two. Fast forward to 2025 in the Championship, and they're packing out the Kazam Stadium. Definitely a team who I think would benefit from a stadium expansion. Adding that fourth stand I think would do them the world of good. But yeah, that's quite something, almost doubling your average gates in the span of 10 years. My side, Preston North End, have seen the 8th biggest gain of fans since 2014/15, with over 5,600 more fans coming in at Deepdale on a weekly basis based on these averages. Now, in 2014/15 we were playing in League One. We were promoted from League One that season. Then for our first few years in the Championship, our average gates regularly sat anywhere from sort of 11 to 13k. But in the last 3 seasons especially, we've really seen them rising up to over 16k on average now. 7th on this list, we've got the Middlesbrough fans, who have seen a gain of over 5,800 on average when comparing their average gates from last season to the 2014/15 campaign. And it's an interesting one with Middlesbrough, because you could make the argument that it was probably a little bit more exciting to be a Borough fan in 2014/15 than it was last season. You know, they made the playoffs under Aitor Karanka that season, didn't go up, but then were promoted the following campaign. But when comparing their gates to these days, their average gates have taken a bump by over 5,800. No real surprise to see Sheffield United and their gain in fans, considering in 2014/15 they were playing in League One. I think 2014/15 was their 4th consecutive campaign in the 3rd tier. They'd gone close to promotion a few times that season, lost in the playoff semi-finals against Swindon. When comparing their average gates to these days, they've gained over 8,200 fans over these last 10 years. Now, I think a lot of people might have thought that Wrexham would have topped this list, but they're actually only 5th. They have seen an absolutely massive gain in fans over the last 10 years, the last 5 years especially. But when comparing their average gates to 2014/15, they've gained 9,517 fans in that time. And by the time they've fully constructed that new stand behind the goal, yeah, their average gates are going to go to even higher than they were last season. While playing in non-league in 2014/15, they were getting average gates of just over 3,200. And listen, you're going to get a lot of people making those Hollywood FC comments, talking about glory fans jumping on the bandwagon when it's cool to support Wrexham and things like that. But that's just the case of football. It happens at literally every club up and down the country. As soon as you get good, you're going to attract more fans. But compared to 10 years ago, Wrexham have actually only seen the 5th biggest gain of fans, which I think is interesting. One place above Wrexham on this table, we've got the Ipswich Town fans with a gain of 10,139 supporters since the 2014/15 campaign. Now, no surprise whatsoever that Ipswich's average gates have absolutely soared in recent years with the success that they've had under Kieran McKenna. Obviously, these numbers taken from last season when they were in the Premier League. 2014/15, they were playing in the Championship under Mick McCarthy. But it has to be said, over 10,000 fans gained in the last 10 years. Yeah, that is absolutely massive. Third on this list, we've got the Birmingham fans, who have seen a gain of 10,172 on average when comparing their attendances to the 2014/15 campaign. The context that's worth taking into consideration here as well is the fact that in 2014/15 they were playing in a higher division than they were last season. They were a steady Championship club around that time. But the overall vibe and mood around Birmingham is just completely different to 10 years ago, and that's seen by these monumental gains in the average attendances. What I find interesting about Birmingham at the moment is the scale and ambition of this project. Obviously, they recently announced plans to build a new 62,000-seater stadium. A realistic question to Birmingham fans, though, is how big do you think that fan base actually is, and what's the potential that it could go to? Let's say, for instance, by the time you move into that new stadium, you're sort of a yo-yo club going between the Premier League and Championship, bouncing between those divisions. What do you think your average gates could be around that time, considering you're playing in a 62,000-seater stadium? Are you filling the majority of that out? I don't know, let me know. What's the potential there, Blues fans? Second on this list, we've got the Bristol City fans, who have seen their average gates increase by over 10,300 when compared to 10 years ago. Now, in 2014/15, Bristol City were playing in League One. They won League One that season. It was an absolutely cracking squad. I remember it well. My team, Preston, was also promoted that season. But it's also worth taking into consideration that around that time, Ashton Gate was undergoing serious renovations as well. The stand they had behind the goal wasn't there. So their overall capacity that season was capped, but since all the work that's gone on to improving Ashton Gate, the fact that they have now established themselves as a solid mid-table Championship club with the ambitions to push above that, as we saw last season, no surprises that they've seen such a gain in their fan base over that time. But topping this list by an absolute mile, we've got the Coventry fans, who have gained over 18,400 fans in these last 10 years. Now, with Coventry and these numbers, a lot of context needs to be taken into consideration. Around this time, they were having severe issues with ownership of their stadium. In 2013/14, they spent the entire campaign playing at the Northampton ground. Now, thankfully, eventually in 2014/15, they were able to move back to the Ricoh Arena after a couple games of that season. But despite moving back there, understandably, their fans weren't exactly coming back in droves around that time. They finished 18th in League One that season, so despite being back at the Ricoh, only got average gates of just over 9,300. You compare that to last season in the Championship, where they're attracting just shy of 28k on average, and it's absolute night and day when comparing the last 10 years for Coventry. As you can see on that list there, that column at the end, fans gained and lost, they're top of this one by an absolute country mile. But there you guys have it. That will now wrap it up for today's video. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you did go into enjoy, make sure to drop a like and get all your thoughts in the comments down below. We always do these videos just for a little bit of fun, but if you'd like to see more, make sure to drop a like. Apart from that, thank you very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you all in the next one.